Yeah.
So if you're a leader who wants to lead with intention, and one of your intentions is to grow and empower and coach your team, then you need to think about, what does coaching my team look like? Maybe that is having one-on-one meetings with them to understand where their growth is, sharing what pitfalls you faced and how you learned from it. And again, back to that, empowering them and letting them teach you something.
Hey everyone, we are here with Ashlee. Ashlee is CEO of Our Forte. She works on developing leaders to become the leaders they wish they had. Thanks for being here with me, Ashlee.
Thank you so much for having me here, Tyler. I'm excited about our conversation today.
Me too. Very excited. Well, perfect. So let's get right into it. We want to talk a lot about leading with intention today. Leading with intention so that your leadership aligns with your organization's values, visions, all of that. So do you want to give us a brief overview of that topic, of that principle?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll kind of start with what inspired me to really focus in on my business and then training others to do this. Way back when I worked in a corporate job, I had a boss. I won't even say that they were a leader. Had a boss who said all the right things, said all the things that you needed to hear. We're a family-friendly organization. Vacation time is your sacred space. All of the things that she knew she needed to say. And I think she believed it, but she didn't practice it. And there was this so me being a younger, eager employee was watching this role model or this person in power and seeing this seeing the listen to my words, but don't follow my actions, or hear my words, but don't actually do that because you're going to get in trouble for it.
Right.
So for instance, if we didn't check our email or respond to things on vacation, or sometimes even if we took our vacation, we were penalized for it.
Interesting.
In a very interesting way, because she couldn't actually get us in trouble on paper.
Right.
But there were very passive aggressive bullying type ways that we were getting in trouble. So the culture became one of, don't take vacation. If your kid is sick, you better figure that out because you're coming to work. We're not a family-friendly organization. And it was every person for themselves. We were not a team who had each other's backs or even knew how to appropriately challenge one another because we were all so afraid of getting in trouble.
Yeah.
And this was my first aha or experience with someone who was not leading the way they said they were. They were not being intentional. They thought they were, but their actions and their words did not align. And when I finally left that organization and started my own business, it was really important for me. So now I can look back and say that was a great teaching moment, and I can thank her in my mind, not actually. I can thank her for showing me how important it actually is to what you say you're going to do, to have it align with your actions. I really think gone are the days of do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
I think that's very old school leadership. And we really need to go the way we intend.
Right.
And know that as leaders, whether you are a solopreneur who has a lot of, contractors working for you, even when you're dealing with your clients, that you're following through on your values, on your word, your character, your integrity, all of those big words and big ideals that people have. What does that look like in reality to you?
Right.
So that's really where I spend a lot of my time. And again, we're not robots. We're human and we make mistakes, but knowing that it's also okay to say sorry or say, seems I messed that up. And since I want to lead, with compassion, I'll have compassion for myself and I'll have compassion for the others who are making mistakes. And now we'll shift and do something differently.
Right. Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And so Our Forte, and you guys focus on basically helping leaders discover those kind of weaknesses, basically, right?
Yeah, so we work with leaders who know something's off. Right?
Okay.
Leaders who are kind of like you and I, who are like, I don't want to do it the way that like our grandparents did things,
Yeah,
or
right.
even our parents of this do as I say, not as I do. We want to be more evolved leaders, but we've never been shown how.
Yeah.
We don't have role models other than like, Brene Brown and Simon Sinek and, some of the big names, but we've never
Yeah.
actually worked with them.
Right, right.
We haven't seen day to day, well, what is it like when they're stressed? What is it like when things are going well? What is it like when things aren't going well? And how do we model our behavior, to move forward in a better way? So that's really who I'm interested in working with, are leaders who want to do things differently, who want
Yeah.
to do things a better way. They don't even know where to start.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So, quick tangent, real quick. I'm really curious, because you work with all these different leaders, you work with leaders trying to focus on leading with intention. What have you noticed? And it sounds like, you work with leaders to make sure that, their employees have a good work-life balance, that they're as productive as they can be. What are your thoughts on like the 4-day work week? And is that effective or not?
I think it can be effective, just like I think hybrid work environments, remote work, in-person work, as long as a leader, you are effectively communicating the expectations and there are accountabilities that go along with it. I think there's a book, and I hope I don't butcher the quote too much, but somebody had said, empowerment without accountability equals entitlement.
Interesting.
And so this is what a lot of leaders worry about a 4-day work week or even complete remote work is, well, everyone's so entitled.
Yeah.
And so for me, that missing piece, right, we're going to solve for X here is, well, where's the accountability?
Yeah. Right.
If you are appropriately setting expectations, but refusing to hold people accountable, or there's a ton of accountability, but no clear expectations, we're not balanced in that.
Yeah.
So I do think, work-life harmony is more my jam as opposed to balance, because people want everything to be equal, and they that's a whole other episode. But helping people figure out, when are you most productive? What work really moves you? What do you need support in? I think we could have, very consistently 4-day work weeks, but we need to then give people that time off. And this is where boundaries and time management, two pieces that I think leaders really need to focus on when they start leading with intention. Those skills really need to be honed in.
Yeah. Gotcha. I love that. Well, and one point that you brought up is solving for X, the accountability. The accountability piece is so important. One thing that I've noticed, because I'm sure I could learn a ton from you in this sphere, but I try to, empower the people that work with me. But I think other people, and myself included, sometimes feel like, okay, if you're trying to empower somebody, it almost feels counterintuitive to set, metrics on them, or to set up accountability, because it's like, hey, I'm trying to, empower or trust this person enough to be autonomous, or to work on their own, or to take on this project by themselves, And so it almost feels like, again, counterintuitive to now say, okay, well, I don't quite trust you enough to take it completely on your own. Like, I do need to monitor you in this way, or set this expectation or this metric. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, how can you overcome that mental hurdle, or I guess just set up accountability so that it's still empowering?
Yes, you just answered it. I think it's, again, so your brain, my brain, most people's brains immediately went to seeing accountability as a restrictive, negative punishment, or a container that you can't play outside of the boundaries.
Yeah.
And accountability, like, I love having accountability. I'm accountable to a ton of people. I sign on a new client and I'm accountable to them.
Right.
That doesn't scare me. It actually makes me feel empowered. It motivates me to want to do a good job for them.
Yeah.
I know what the expectations are, and that is my driving force. It does not make me feel restrictive. Accountability doesn't have to be, report in and tell me all 10 steps and make sure you hit the order of them and, needs to be in by 5 o'clock. Accountability is more, you've committed to doing this job
Yeah.
by this time. Therefore, it's now the time. I've given you all the tools, right? And I've communicated the expectation. That's accountability. Most people I know as well, when you don't have a deadline, have you ever been given something where someone's like, hey, do you mind doing this? And there's no deadline. There's no in what capacity, how important is it, what's the priority? You end up either like procrastinating or just like losing it.
Yep.
And then they come back to you and they're like, hey, where's that thing I asked for? That to me is more stressful for team members than it is to say, hey, got a new project, really hoping that you can take a look at this. Here's what I'm thinking. And here's when I need it by, or at least I need first draft by this time. Right. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
What else do you need from me in order to be successful at this? And now it's a conversation and we're co-creating something as opposed to me just ditching something on them.
Yeah.
Or micromanaging it.
Yeah. Interesting. So, I mean, and I think the most powerful piece of what you just said is making accountability collaborative, because I feel like that just strikes a chord, and I can think of, many experiences in my head of when that's happened. And like, I feel like that's the best, most productive time spent, with people is when we've made accountability collaborative. Because like you said, I know accountability is important for myself and for anybody that, works with me. And so I know there needs to be that accountability aspect. Because like you said, if I assign this big project to somebody, but then give no metrics of success, then I'm like literally just setting them up for failure. Like that just never works, like maybe sometimes the project will come in or, maybe it'll work out okay. But I'm really just as a leader setting them up for failure more or less. So I know I need that accountability. And like you said, I think that's how you make it empowering is like, hey, we know we need this accountability. So let's set these metrics. What do you think? What should change? What is reasonable?
Yeah. And getting their feedback on, this isn't doable, or it would be great. What I need from you is to be able to check in with you twice during this project. Yeah. And you can say, great, I'll create space in my calendar to have that space for you to do that.
Right.
It's so much more, like you said, collaborative. And if you've ever worked with a perfectionist, I've heard they're out there among us.
I have.
When you don't give them metrics or idea of scope or what you're going to judge success on, they will go down the rabbit hole of fighting themselves of what perfect looks like to them.
Yeah.
And trying to mind read. And then they're just wasting so much time. Totally. And they won't ever feel productive or accomplished.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, that's so interesting. Well, and so another aspect that I wanted to talk about is, so, I mean, going back to just that base topic of accountability being empowerment. I think, I mean, everything ties into like that perfectionist thing that you just talked about. I don't know. I just go back to that. Like, accountability is so important to feel even good about the efforts that you're making. And I think what I wanted to point out is that sometimes it feels like accountability can reveal weakness almost. Like sometimes I don't want to set up accountability for myself because that feels like I'm not able to do it without accountability. Like I'm not capable enough to be successful at this without being accountable to somebody. So as like a leader, I feel like sometimes that's maybe a temptation where, like if I set up this accountability or these metrics for success, that could show where I'm faulty, these areas that I'm faulty in or that I'm weak at. Do you experience that? Do you see other people struggling with that where it might reveal some weakness of theirs?
Yeah. And I think too, again, this is where we have some perfectionist leaders or
Yeah.
leaders who are still stuck in that I can't show weakness or I can't show that
Yeah.
I don't have the answer. But if you have all of the answers, you're also likely to be annoyed when everyone keeps coming to you with all their questions. Because if you're the only one with the answers, then we have another issue.
Hey everyone, in this quick break, I wanted to give a shout out to Coconut VA. They are making this podcast possible. This podcast is hosted by me, but a lot of the back end work is actually done by a Coconut VA. I'm the co-founder of Coconut VA, and we find Filipino virtual assistants for US companies. So if you've got a proven business model, you're growing, you need help with operations, general admin, lead generation, or really any help around the business, you could probably hire a Coconut VA. You can find a link on my podcast page, thebtspodcast.com, or at coconutva.com. My podcast is a great example of how Coconut VA could help you. I've done the work to systematize my podcast, systematize the production process, and now I can bring in a Coconut VA to actually execute that process. If you're ready to delegate tasks, you're ready to hire a Coconut VA.
So if you're a leader who wants to lead with intention, and one of your intentions is to grow and empower and coach your team, then you need to think about, what does coaching my team look like? Maybe that is having one-on-one meetings with them to understand where their growth is, sharing what pitfalls you faced and how you learned from it. And again, back to that, empowering them and letting them teach you something, right? Like we can't know everything. And every time we try to, something else falls, right? Like really working in our zone of genius is the best way to lead.
Yeah.
Right. And then surrounding yourself by people who complement where you don't have the skill.
Yeah.
And I think that the best leaders are the ones who really build this team around them to help raise everyone up and not just the leader. Right.
Yeah.
It's not just the leader standing at the top watching everyone else.
Right.
And, you know, accountability, words like accountability, boundaries, you know, leadership, all of these often have so many stories attached to it. And part of the work that I do with leaders is helping them see that they're telling themselves the story, right? That me having to ask for accountability shows a weakness, to flip that story into me asking for accountability really shows that I trust you and I want to grow too, that I'm not done learning and growing. And in order to be the best leader for you and everyone else, like I want to improve on this, or I know that as a leader, I have 72 things that are a priority to me. This one is really important and I need to be held accountable. I need to make sure I'm hitting my deadlines.
Yeah.
And whether you're accountable to other people or even yourself, you know, that accountability to yourself sometimes is actually scarier to many people.
Yeah.
Because you always know when you've taken a shortcut, or you always know when you haven't given it 100% or whatever. And so more often or not, we're more worried about disappointing ourselves than we are about other people.
Yeah, very true. And I mean, I mean, for me at least, like I don't know, I'm a visual person. And so like I have this project management tool, monday.com. And like one thing that we've implemented is a routine board, and it's mostly, you know, personal. And like you say, it's really just to help you reflect on yourself and what you're doing well and, you know, where you're falling short. And honestly, I just resonate with what you just said, because like just seeing that board and like, okay, Monday, I had these 5 things to do and these 2 things I missed. Like, I don't need to show that to anybody. I feel enough like guilt and shame that I missed these 2 such, you know, so easy tasks, you know, that like, okay, why didn't I do that? What could I change to do that tomorrow, you know? And just measuring it, I feel like is so important. Again, you know, just basic accountability, just measuring these very basic things. And like you said, even just personally measuring that and reflecting on that, I feel like is a really powerful tool.
Yeah, getting to know yourself and having those compassionate conversations with yourself to say, oh man, I missed it. Why did I miss it? It's like, oh, well, maybe I got a call from my kid's school and I ended up doing that. Or maybe I got a real creative vibe going and I ended up doing this instead. Or maybe I overcommitted.
Yeah.
Oh, I seem to keep overcommitting. This is a pattern, right? This is a pattern I'm noticing, that I keep putting 5 things on my calendar to do every day
Right.
and never ever getting there.
Yeah.
Is it me overcommitting, or am I not using my time effectively? Which is it? Or is it a combination of both?
Yeah.
So it gives you really good insight to yourself.
Yeah.
And before you can do that as a leader for other people, got to be able to do it for yourself first.
Yeah, totally. Well, so kind of my last question to maybe tie it all together is, what are your other tips to actually create this kind of safe space in your company? Like, how can you say, okay, I've maybe it's your previous boss and she's listening to this and she wants to
She's not
improve, and even if that's not possible, there is somebody out there, that wants to improve. So, how can I, day one, start to create a safe space for myself and for other people to say, okay, now we are going to change how we're doing things, be more intentional. What are your tips to creating that safe space where it's not, we're not showing our weaknesses to make fun of each other or to be harsh on each other, to get each other fired, right? Like, now it's a safe space where we're all going to grow together.
Yeah, I think first you have to be willing to invite feedback in and understand and really almost audit where things are at from, again, a non-judgmental way.
Yeah.
It's like that. When you know better, you do better. So this is the first step of doing better without judgment. So I guess first I would ask, get that feedback in, talk to your team, talk to your clients, like seek that feedback. Is what you believe, your values and your intention, is it aligning currently?
Right.
And if not, then my next piece is figure out what you do, like what is important to you, and collaborate with your team, bring them in on it. Is it to be a compassionate leader? And what does that look like? Is it to be productive? We're going to be a really productive team who works 4 days a week. How are we going to do that? You have to not just come up with the value or the word. You have to come up with what goes into that.
Yeah.
It's like setting goals for yourself. Saying you want to run a marathon is great, but then you have to break it down. What does the training schedule look like to get to that marathon? And I often encourage people, especially if you haven't been practicing this yet, is start with one. Start with one area of focus, because if you introduce 5 or 6 values or attributes, whatever you want to say, new ways of doing things, you will not be able to sustain it. It'll be too much, too fast, and the wheels will fall off, right? You'll kind of get that momentum going and all of a sudden you're spiraling.
Right.
So pick one that matters most right now, that's going to have the biggest impact on your organization and you as a leader, and break it down and practice it daily, weekly, until it now becomes can't believe I never did that before.
Yeah.
And then you introduce another one.
Gotcha.
You have to flex that muscle first.
Yeah.
And be prepared to say, that was a bit of a setback, hit a bump in the road. How do we move through, as opposed to just going, this didn't work. Go back to the old way.
Gotcha. And so to clarify, what are some examples maybe of clients you've worked with in the past? Like, what is that one thing? Like you said, you mentioned compassionate leaders. So what are some other examples of okay, here's one value we as an organization can work on?
Yeah. So one of my most recent clients, it was a productivity utilization kind of debate that we were having. And the team felt completely burnt out, completely overwhelmed, but their productivity was not high. So what it came down to was boundaries. And so we wanted to really look at, what do boundaries look like in this organization? How are we setting them? How are we communicating them? And how are we holding and respecting them? And that was a big piece of the work of, leaders at the top, asking for things from middle management, but also those lower employees asking for things from middle management, and middle management was dropping everything for everyone and never getting any of their own work done. So they were the lowest productivity. They had the worst utilization rate because they had no boundaries. And so it really was about empowering them to be able to set boundaries, to say to partners, is this a priority? Because I'm already working on this. Where shall I slot this in? And to not always drop everything for their team who had questions, but instead to say, come to me when you've worked through all the problem solving skills you have, or my office hours are from 1 to 2 every day. That's when I answer your questions. Spend time figuring out and really holding that, because a lot of people say yes to boundaries. Boundaries are a good thing, 4-day work week, off on weekends, vacation time, but they don't practice them. They say they have them, but that's one of those intention pieces.
And
set it and practice it.
Right. And I think part of that, I mean, I don't know what exactly you do to kind of practice that, or I guess even just get over those mental blocks. But I think something that would be helpful for me, I know, is even going through like practice situations, almost like role playing, you know, like let's say that we're in a really very busy, like, okay, so I have this value, and now let's say that we're in this tough situation where it's hard to uphold that value, right? Like, can now, you know, this one person that's key to the operation is struggling with her family or whatever, and should be taking time off. If we're going to stick to this value, am I actually going to be strong enough to uphold that value, or am I going to cave to the pressures of the business and, you know, pressures of success, you know?
I will say too that the pressures of the business will always crash if the people aren't strong. And they're not healthy.
Right.
So holding boundaries and holding people accountable and empowering them, all of this is about building the people to be strong and healthy so that the businesses can be strong and healthy.
I love that. That's perfect. That's a perfect way to wrap it up. Well, awesome. So I mean, that is all I wanted to talk about today. Do you have any other last tips, tricks, advice that you want to share with the audience before we sign off?
I mean, just don't jump in, like, you know, don't have an all or nothing type approach. Really take it baby steps and celebrate each progress, right? Every step, celebrate that success and continue learning. It doesn't have to be like so templated and a formula. It's all about continuing to learn and celebrate the wins along the way.
Nice. Love it. Perfect. Well, awesome. So how can the audience get in touch with you or work with you?
So I hang out often on Instagram. So it's Our Forte on Instagram. And then I'm on LinkedIn as well. So it's Ashlee.Livingstone. There are a bunch of E's in my name. Maybe we'll put it in the show notes.
I can put a link,
Nobody ever spells my name right. So that, and then just my website is ourforte.ca, resident Canadian over here, but work with people all across Canada and the United States. So happy to have a conversation if you are interested in making some changes in your organization.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on today, Ashlee.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Startup. If you like the show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a review.